Hey there, and welcome to the Overcomers Overcoming podcast. It is great to have you join us. This podcast series features those who have gained victory over a life encounter. With that life experience, we encourage those who are experiencing something that might seem to be insurmountable. We advance and encourage others by passing forward evaluated life experiences. We have three objectives in this podcast series. We want to encourage those who are engaged in any type of life encounter by offering to walk with you to help you gain victory over anything that might seem impossible. We want to share our experience to help you. Our second objective is to help you develop a confident resolve that there are multiple options to get past any life obstacle. It's a matter of thinking into the situation. Our third objective is to help you with critical thinking skills. If you are facing a dilemma resulting from a previous decision you wish you could reverse, we want to help you think into all of the facts and factors involved in making an informed decision. I'm Ron Cooper, founder of the Cooper Culture. I'm with my wife and business manager, Marty. Together, we are the Cooper Culture Company who is sponsoring this podcast series. Today, we feature Amanda Blackwood, who talks to us about human trafficking. It is somewhat of a complex topic in that there are various definitions of it. I kind of look at it in a somewhat elementary way in that human trafficking takes advantage of the vulnerable, and the vulnerable people are the ones who may have a lower self-image. They're uncertain who they are, what their value is. Some people, through manipulation, and there is a term that's becoming more often used, gaslighting, that says that I will intimidate you into believing you are something less than you are if you don't conform to what I think of you and say about you. It seems that there are some who can identify early on those who are vulnerable to this type of human traffic, and it seems those who are engaged in human traffic have a lesser opinion of humans, their worth, their dignity, and so forth. It's a very debilitating aspect of attitude toward life, but Amanda has what I characterize a very elegant confidence about what she has overcome, and she was not then what she is now, but that confidence is one that exudes a very confident way about her, certainly not arrogant or braggadocious. But Marty, what are some takeaways you got from Amanda and this overall topic of trafficking?
It's amazing what she has gone through. Her life story of trauma dealing with human trafficking and being a survivor in which a church became her safe haven. Her story of overcoming relationships with people, and as she states, that dirty of all dirties, forgiveness, that you have to actually learn to do even though the trauma was so horrible.
And let's listen for the impact a 4-year-old had on her. Let's listen and learn together. Amanda, thank you so much on behalf of our listeners for joining us. You have a life experience our listeners are going to be very interested in learning about. Thank you for agreeing along with us. We're not here to dwell on the past, but rather a brief explanation of what the past has been so our listeners can identify, and we're all about today and moving forward. You have some experience in some trauma recovery mentoring, but also in human trafficking. Would you be willing to share with our listeners just a little bit of your past and how you're making the very best of the past, living today and forward?
Absolutely. So with most victims of human trafficking, we experience some early childhood traumas and abuses also. I grew up in an extremely abusive household, and it started to build these neurosynapses in my brain that made me start to believe and understand that the people who loved me were the people who were also going to hurt me. As long as I continued that pattern, I kept on seeking out these very damaging and hurtful relationships, because if they weren't hurting me, it meant that they didn't love me, and I had no purpose in that relationship. So the first time I was trafficked, I was 18 years old. I was trafficked 3 different times. The last time I was trafficked, I was actually 31. So I went through many, many years of just continual trauma and abuse. When I managed to get out of that, I was very quiet about it. I didn't want to tell people what had happened because I was afraid of being judged. Years later, in 2019, I was 39 years old. I found out about a brutal attack that happened against me online that included contact information about how stalkers and other nefarious people could find me in real life. That's when I started to speak out. I started to realize that if people were going to continually find me because of what somebody else did to me, and they were going to continually victimize me, I needed them to understand why they were finding me. And when I started speaking about it, I was very quiet. It was like I was trying to figure out what the words were, how to talk about it. And then I started to kind of get this push, this nudge from God. You have a voice. You have a lion in your lungs. Let it out.
I don't want to assume every one of us understands totally what human trafficking is. I want to explain it in what I think I understand it to be, and that is just very briefly, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong or not inclusive enough. Human trafficking largely is a network of those who abuse you sexually. You're just treated as a warm piece of meat. Have I oversimplified it or not explained it very well?
That pretty much covers it. The Department of Homeland Security defines it as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or sex acts from another person. So when you break it down, you notice there's no mention of transportation of the person from one place to another. That's actually human smuggling. And there's no mention of money exchanged, which is prostitution. So when you start looking at these things and breaking them down, you have to understand that all 3 of these things are separate issues that all need to be addressed, but they're so often confused for one another because there's such a huge overlap in that world. Yeah, I was essentially treated as a piece of meat. I was bought and sold like property.
You mentioned you were raised in a very abusive family. I'm reading into what you're saying that you were uncertain of your worth, or maybe you felt you really didn't have any value, any worth, anything of that nature. Have I not adequately described anything that you were feeling at the time?
No, that totally hits it. I grew up in a very small household. It was my mother, my father, and my brother. My brother was my earliest molester when I was 4. My father was physically abusive. My mother was mentally and emotionally abusive. When I grew up in that whole household where every single member in my family was in some way attacking not just me, but each other, there was this massive network built in my brain that made me believe that's all my life was worth. That's all I was ever going to experience.
Oh my golly, Amanda, I use the term frequently, being a chain breaker. I'm picturing right now you broke the chain of events. And to some degree, you could say, and this is somewhat the victim mentality, and I think you're the antithesis of the victim mentality, but to a certain extent, that's all you knew. You were raised in an environment in X number of years. That's all you knew, but you chose to come out of that. You chose to be on the offensive, if I could use that term. And you chose a totally different life. And again, have I feel like I'm using very elementary terms, but does that describe Amanda Blackwood?
It describes Amanda Blackwood today. It would not have described Amanda Blackwood 10 years ago. I was a doormat. I was still in hiding, trying to figure out how to deal with life and everything that I'd been through. I decided, because of that one last attack in 2019, I was going to fight back. I was tired of hiding. No matter where I went or how hard I hid or how much I changed my physical appearance, my mannerisms, where I lived, I moved 1,000 miles trying to get away from these attacks that were happening from 6,000 miles away. No matter what I did, it wasn't going to stop. So the monster who did things to me is the monster who created the monster in me.
I picture you saying my self-image, my self-confidence, my self-awareness, my self-love, anything like that. And I think I'm saying that all in a very positive sense. But it seems to me you're saying, self, you can get out from under this. Self, we're going to do whatever it takes to start a new life.
That was a big part of it. So was getting back into church. Such a monumental thing for me. So when I was young, I ran away from home at about 8 years old to be able to run off to church. I had learned from a couple of friends about what God was, and we used to pray over the dinner table, but only at dinner, and it was a very short, brief prayer. But I felt this in me that I needed to go to church. When my parents found out, I would get into a lot of trouble because they didn't want me going that far. They didn't want me going to that church because it wasn't their denomination. They didn't want me going without them. They had all of these rules. So I grew up in a household where not only was I oppressed mentally and emotionally and physically, but now religiously too. So I fought back against that over the years. And it was not long after I moved to Colorado. I had a friend that was an audio engineer in a small church in Broomfield, Colorado, and he invited me to go to church with him. And I started going, and I found what seemed like a sense of home. I've moved 43 times in my life, so having a sense of home was a new feeling for me. When the pastor retired and I couldn't find another church, I prayed that God would help me to find a place to go. And it was so pivotal for everything that I was going through that I needed to have that sense of home, that sense of belonging, that sense of God in my life. And the man that I married 1.5 years ago now is the audio engineer for the church where I go now.
Amanda, I wanted to ask you, and hopefully I'm not asking something that you don't want to talk about, but how would a person recognize that some man, say a girl, or maybe our teenage granddaughter, is trying to get to her and traffic her?
There are a couple of key indicators. One of the first things that people need to look out for is emotional manipulations. So these can be very minor things at first, such as, if you love me, you'll have this shot of alcohol. Even though this is an underage kid, they know better. They're feeling this peer pressure to do this. One peer pressure can always lead to another peer pressure as long as they're willing to give in. If they don't have healthy boundaries as to where they are willing to stop to have any kind of communication with this person, they will continue to push them. Eventually, it becomes a form of blackmail in most cases, where the young man will then have risque or nude photos of the young woman because he has pressured her into getting them to him. And then he begins to threaten her by telling her, I'm going to show this to your family unless you do XYZ for me. That continually progresses until they have enough on them to be able to force them into sexual situations that they don't want to be in.
What you just said is very important, and I would like for our listeners to really understand this. I'm guessing, based on what you're saying and what you've just said, the people who want to prey on you, I mean the PREY type prey on you, can identify your vulnerabilities, your lack of self-fulfillment, your lack of self-esteem, confidence, and so forth. They can see that in you, and they manipulate you by saying, if you love me, you will, or something of that nature. That's what I'm reading into what you're saying.
Right. And that's a great way of putting it. It's absolutely all of these different manipulations, and they figure out what all of your weaknesses are. And unfortunately, with the internet being what it is today, and all of us competing with one another to have more likes and to have more comments on our social media posts, we're continually seeing these lowered self-esteems of, I'm not as good as Sharon over there because Sharon got 50 likes on her most recent post and I've only got 10 on mine. We start to compare ourselves and not realize that Sharon over there has a professional photographer and she's only showing the highlight reels of her life, not the hard days too.
Wow, that is very important. I think I'm reading into what you're saying, social media, not just reading into it, you'd have mentioned it. We need to be very careful of social media, the what can be the adverse impact of that on people. We need to be very careful about being aware of a person's demeanor. Have I expressed that correctly?
Yes. The last man that trafficked me, I had known him for 7 years before he got me under his control. And he used a lot of these manipulation tactics, and he got to know me through the internet first. This is absolutely key for everything that I went through personally. When I started learning about how these are patterns that are used regularly in the world of human trafficking, it blew my mind.
Are you a mom, a parent right now?
I am actually a grandmom as of 2 weeks ago.
Oh
Well,
my goodness.
congratulations. That
Thank
is a
you.
perfect segue. How do we appropriately monitor, be aware of whatever the term, internet usage, social media, and so forth? Marty and I, to our grandparents, we want to be appropriate. That is, I think there is good in the internet, social media, and so forth. But if we could segregate the good from the bad, that would be the ideal way of doing that. Has your life experience taught you in the context of the good and the bad of internet and social media?
First of all, education is key. Understanding what's out there and keeping up to date with it. We don't have excuses anymore. We have all of this information at our fingertips, and there are databases that the police and FBI put out there to show parents what to watch for and what to look for. There's an app out there that looks like a nondescript calculator that you can put on your phone, where if you hit a key sequence of numbers, then it opens up a file holder where you can store photos and documents. And a lot of this stuff is really nefarious. There are probably dozens of apps out there right now that standard teens have on their mobile phones that they can hide stuff from their parents or their friends. This is exactly the kind of thing that we need to watch out for. These are the kinds of things that the FBI and the police are constantly putting up notices about. But a lot of parents want to act as though this kind of thing can't happen to them. It can't happen to their families. And it absolutely can and does.
Wow. Now, I'm picturing from what you just said, I'm forming a mental image. We need to be very careful about cell phones. In fact, our 16-year-old daughter does not have her own cell phone yet. I am a huge advocate that just because you're living and breathing doesn't entitle you and have a need for a cell phone. And so, by some standards, Marty and I might be judged as or assessed as antiquated or otherwise controlling, but yet we know there are things that can happen, and we just need to be a full-time parent and monitor things that are happening because, again, I'm picturing what you're saying, Amanda, that apps, different things can be on the cell phone and in the privacy of other people can influence your mind. And God, Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior. We want to be that principal influence, but we know we are engaged in a cultural warfare.
Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, as it is with most things, there is no real separation of the good and the evil. We just have to make sure that we're aware of it and we fight back against it when we see it.
Right now, when I have Angelina and we're out, say I have to, we're in just like Wawa, a gas station, a big gas station. I have to go to the bathroom. I make her go to the bathroom with me because I don't know who's out there. And I don't know who would try and kidnap her. And I tell her that. I let her know that I'm protecting her. And she will come into the bathroom with me, whether she has to go or not. I am totally protective. And I don't want to be too protective on it. But at the same time, I mean, I don't want anything to happen to her.
Right. Well, and another thing that you have to keep in mind is you don't want anything to happen to you. There's always more safety in numbers. And Marty, I don't know if you're aware of this or not. I'm sure Ron tells you this quite often, but you're a lovely lady. You're beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
The oldest person rescued from human trafficking in recent years here in the state of Colorado was in her 70s.
Oh, my goodness.
But another thing to really keep an eye on is that most people that are trafficked by people they know and trust and love. 85% or more of all cases are done by parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, boyfriends and girlfriends. It's somebody with a sense of authority already in their life. The fact of somebody being kidnapped off the streets and then sold into human trafficking is incredibly rare. It's more likely to have a kidnapper be a serial rapist than a trafficker.
But I'm going to ask, there are people coming over the border that are known to be that. That's what they're doing. Are they doing it to those that are coming over the border with them?
Sure, there's some cases of it. And if you remember the original definition, moving somebody from one location to another is human smuggling. There is a lot of overlap. When human smuggling is occurring, this can and often and usually is with the consent of the person being transported, right? So when human trafficking occurs, that's when they are being forced to do things that they don't want to do by means of force, fraud, or coercion. So there's a massive overlap. Not everybody that's coming across the border is being trafficked. Mm-hmm. They are being smuggled. They're not being trafficked.
I want to ask you about awareness, and now it's a little bit of a call to action to the listener who might be in the presence of a vulnerable person. The vulnerability, I think, Amanda, you have expressed to include, but not to be solely focused on, maybe a low self-image, a low confidence, and just uncertain what your life value is and so forth. If you are in the presence of that kind of person, how can we best intervene, if I could use that term? And just bear with me, explain what I'm trying to say. That is, it's a call to action to us to engage in another person's life. Engage is, for me, in this context, is the operative word. I want to engage in a very effective way. I am a person who would rather have to apologize than eulogize. And what I mean by that is I'd rather apologize to you if I misassessed, but I don't want to have to eulogize if I just dismissed something I thought I observed, but I just didn't have the courage or something to engage. Can you help us in that?
It can be really difficult to engage somebody in this kind of an abusive situation. A lot of people don't do it because most of the time when people are on the outside looking in, they see it as not my circus, not my monkeys. That's become a very common phrase in the last few years. People feel like they're going to be sued if they intervene in somebody else's life. And a lot of times this has happened because when somebody does CPR on somebody else, they end up breaking ribs. And then that person who was close to death ends up suing that person. But it's so much more of a relief on us to know that we've at least stepped in and tried. And stepping in and asking somebody if they're okay, if they need help in some way, that's not a suable offense. Get involved, talk to them, find out where they are mentally, emotionally, see if they need help, give them resources if you feel they need resources, like the telephone number for the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Or there's a new program that's rolled out in the last year called 988. So if you know, when you call 911, you receive either police or fire department, depending on the type of emergency. Well, 988 sends a therapist and usually somebody with lived experience to talk to the person to help them through the hard times that they're dealing with. In some cases, they send them out to them in person to get them out of the situation or to talk them down from the edge of a cliff. It's a huge help, but unless people are aware that this resource is available to them, is the same thing as not having that option.
Not my circus, not my monkey. What is your reaction to Amanda's characterization of some people's response to wondering if a person is okay? There are times you can notice or wonder if a person is okay. but you're reluctant to engage with that person because you might get a response that's none of your business. You may not feel equipped to empathize with that person. You may not feel you know how to effectively engage with that person. And so sometimes we choose to dismiss anything we think might be the appropriate action because we feel inadequate. I want to do everything I can to encourage you to equip yourself to be ready for, be prepared for the possibility you are engaging someone who's being trafficked, and to have the courage to just ask them if they are okay. It is very possible their response might be, "No, I need help. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for caring. I hope you will help me out of the situation I'm in." I want to do everything I can to encourage you to engage with others, to have the courage to do so. Our listeners are very interested in knowing your first steps of saying this, everything you've described will stop. It'll end right now. I am going to do whatever I have to do to get away from, start a new life, and so forth. Were you able to do that on your own, or did it require, let's say, a group of mentors to help you make this transition?
It was a long process for me. The first person to step in was a approximately 4-year-old little boy at a train station that stopped me from ending my own life in the height of my abuse in 2011. He looked at me with the wisdom well beyond his years, and it was a moment of clarity where I understood God was telling me that I am seen, I am heard, even when I'm not speaking. And it saved my life. Through years of studying psychology on my own as a high school dropout with no formal education, to try to figure out why our brains work the way they do and how to start ending this cycle. And when I was going through my process of what I call escape strategy, when I was ending this relationship and getting away from this person, I had to use that training, what I learned about Stockholm Syndrome, which has since recently been rebranded as trauma bonding. I used all of that to make him believe that I would do anything for him. And if he sent me back when my visa expired, that in 6 months' time, I would be able to return to Scotland and go be with him again. So he sent me back because I made him believe that I had done enough studying, enough research. And I know that all of that studying and research that was planted in me by God, because I was not a great student. But when I finally had that final attack in 2019, it took a massive community of people. It took a faith-centralized anti-trafficking organization out here in Colorado to get me into the therapy that I needed and to help me find the legal services that I needed to fight back. With all of that help, I was finally able to get through the worst of everything that I'd ever experienced and find my voice.
The little 4-year-old, what did he do to help you, even though he had no idea?
All he did was look at me. And I know that sounds strange, but there was this moment. It'd been a really, really hard day. I had gotten out of the house and I'd been wandering around. I sat in a churchyard for a while and I begged and pleaded with God to send somebody to come and find me and to ask me if I was okay. And eventually nobody came. So I wandered down to the train station where I had planned on wandering down the tracks and then ending my life by way of the train. And I was sitting on the platform. At the time, I was a smoker. And I was sitting down to have what I thought would be my very last cigarette. Thankfully, the last cigarette was a couple years later, so I did finally quit at something. But while I was sitting there, this man came out and asked for a light for his own cigarette. And I handed him my book of matches. There were only a few left. And he lit his cigarette and he tried to hand them back to me. And I tried to tell him, "You can keep them. I don't need them." And I wanted desperately for this man to ask me, total stranger, wanted him to ask me, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" But no matter what I did, I couldn't get the words out of me to tell him, "Please ask me if I'm okay." I couldn't tell him with my eyes. I couldn't tell him with my words. I was completely mute and emotionless right then. I was desperate. And his little guy, his little boy, walked out onto the train platform, and he just looked up at me. And he had this kind of a sad look on his face. And you know how adults do when we see sad kids, we try to cheer ourselves up so that we can make the kid feel a little better. I did that. And when I did, the little boy looked at me and he briefly smiled, and he went after his dad. And then he tugged on his dad's jacket and he said something to him in sign language. And I knew at that moment I needed to get up and leave. And it took me probably about 20 seconds before I realized that I was running back to what had been my prison rather than toward the train.
Amanda, I and many of our listeners are absolutely encaptured by what you're saying right now. I want to ask you, because I have so many other questions I know our listeners would love to ask you. Would you consider the possibility of coming back on for multiple episodes? I am just I'm encaptured literally at mental health and those 3 words, are you okay? I will tell you, there are some of us, I'm speaking for myself, that would not be confident enough to say, no, I am not okay. You're going to have to develop a very safe relationship with me to even garner a reasonable response from me to say, no, I don't think I am okay. But when you develop a relationship with me, you accept me for who I am. I will be willing to tell you a lot about me. And at that point, I just want you to listen, not talk down to me. And I'm not asking you for counsel at that point. I just feel I just need an outlet, so to speak. Amanda, I sense you are the right person to help us determine, is it okay to ask the question, are you okay? Or do I just need to discern you're not okay and maybe develop a relationship that's, we just know what's intuitively what's happening and what you're going through in your mind, but I'm out to develop a relationship with you. I want you to know I accept you and I love you. I'm not going to talk about anything in depth. Maybe I'm rambling too much. That's a lot of what our listeners want to learn more about, to be able to effectively engage.
And that is a beautiful thing. When you have that intuition that's telling you in the back of your mind, something is not okay with this person, you have to listen to it. The reason that happens is because we have been through hard times ourselves. And again, back to the brain neurosynapses, we have built these neural pathways to keep us hyper vigilant to those moments because it's trying to alert us that there's danger ahead, whether for us or for somebody else. If we listen to that, if we listen to that little voice of God pushing us to say, are you okay? It doesn't matter what that person says. Most of the time we can see right through it if they lie.
Thank you. I want to tell you, I do believe the Holy Spirit will speak through those who accept Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. And we want to, through the depth of our heart, reach other people very effectively. I never want to label or stigmatize, but on the other hand, I don't want to dismiss what might be there. I do want to effectively engage. I want to be a catalyst, that's God's calling in my life, to help equip our listeners to know how to effectively engage. And when we are equipped to know how to effectively engage, Amanda, with your help, your life experience, you can help us determine exactly how best to engage with people. I sense those are several, actually more than one episode that we need to build on. And I'm very interested, along with our listeners, in knowing just how you can so effectively be a trauma recovery mentor, because I do believe there are many people who need that. And we don't need to answer the question right now, but is that an official certification, or is this one of those things that God can use you and equip you to be that mentor? It's just a matter of reaching out with the heart. That's Amanda, thank you. On behalf of our listeners, we are looking forward to other episodes to where we can go into just a little more in depth, because there are many of our listeners who do not feel equipped to know how to work this, but I feel like you are the key to help us learn.
I would also like to know how you got into the work of human trafficking, how you're helping, whatever organization you're helping or you're a part of, and how that all started.
Well, I just published my 13th book on the 1st of this month, and a portion of the proceeds from all of my books do go to local organizations that help pair human trafficking survivors with legal services. They're the same organization that helped me, and I strongly believe in what they're doing. Right. I do the same thing whenever I make money from my trauma recovery one-on-one mentorship or my tiered programs. Anything that I do where I make money, I give back to that organization, because without them, I wouldn't be where I am.
It would be nice to know where all the organizations are. So another podcast, one of many that we could have with you.
Well, and I'll tell the listeners as well, go to the narrative that accompanies this podcast, where I'll explain the 12 books you've written, the 13th in making, and the other organizations. All of that will be available in the narrative. As we engage with each other, we will be very effective in, I would hope, eliminate, but at least reduce the amount of human trafficking.
That would be a beautiful thing to see.
Amanda, on behalf of our listeners, thank you for what you've brought to us so far. Listeners, stay tuned. Additional episodes to advance this topic of human trafficking, how we can identify, encourage, engage with, and empower others to get engaged in a person's life in a very meaningful way. Amanda, thank you so much for sharing. We look forward to continuing this journey with you.
Thank you so much, Ron and Marty. You guys are amazing.
Human trafficking is becoming an increasing problem from our perspective. As Amanda explains it, human trafficking is a crime, and it's defined that way, that involves compelling or coercing a person to provide labor or services to engage in commercial sex acts. That coercion can be subtle, could be overt, could be physical, and it could be psychological. Some statistics. Since the inception of the human trafficking hotline, over 82,000 cases of human trafficking have been identified, involving nearly 165,000 victims. The practice of human trafficking seems to be around us, and it is, let's just say it is somewhat difficult to identify, because the person involved in it, the person who is the target of trafficking, is largely a person who is not going to identify themselves, but they are not okay. They want a person to come up to them, engage them in conversation, to ask them if they are okay, because we possibly see symptoms that identify them as a potential target of trafficking. Some of those symptoms might be indications of a low self-esteem, indications of low confidence, indications of looking at our shoe tops, and it could be just a very solemn look in our face. But it's a matter of us, when we see those symptoms, to simply ask, are you okay? Many of the people with whom we identify, or maybe a better term is assess, as maybe not being okay, are ones who want us to engage with them in conversation. And by doing so, we are empathizing with them as we identify ourselves as being a safe space. Those people feel comfortable explaining to us what is happening. I want to encourage you to use the National Trafficking Local to You to identify and be engaged with those people who may be involved in human trafficking. Let's together purpose to stop human trafficking and show people, by engaging with them in conversation and empathy, we genuinely, from the heart, care for them, care about them. Let's engage. Some people need help overcoming anything of the past, such as human trafficking. Marty and I are certified life coaches through the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team. We can help you overcome any hurts of the past that are keeping you from operating at your full potential. Contact us and schedule a 30-minute complimentary coaching session. We can help you determine if we are the right ones to help you become and perform at your God-given potential. Contact us at ron@thecooperculture.com or Marty, M-A-R-T-Y, at thecooperculture.com. Also, contact us for keynote speaking opportunities where we can address this topic and others relating to relationships and getting along with each other. You can contact us at espeakers, that's plural.com, and search for Ron Cooper, F4 Pilot. We hope we can warrant a 5-star rating with this podcast. We hope we will encourage you to share this podcast with your Facebook friends, your LinkedIn connections, your Twitter and Instagram communities. The more we share, the greater the opportunity we'll have to encourage and equip others, to engage others in conversation, to encourage others to not fall victim to, but be able to overcome any influence that may otherwise keep you from operating at your full potential. We hope you'll consider reviewing us on Apple Podcasts along with the other reviews that are there. Please give us a rating, and we look forward to working with you.